Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. Federal cannabis legalization in the United States. Realistically, when might it happen, and how would it affect the cannabis industry for better or for worse? In this episode, I'll be speaking with Jamie Warm of Henry's Original about how politics can stifle progress for cannabis policy reform. We'll also discuss the shift in the Emerald Triangle, a legendary cannabis growing region in Northern California, as well as cannabis investing trends and more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. My guest today is the CEO of the cannabis company Henry's Original. Welcome to the show, Jamie Warm. Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing well, RJ. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm excited to ask you about some of the latest happening in the world of cannabis. Obviously, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about for sure. So let's dive right into it right now. Let's just start talking about the buzz around federal cannabis legalization. Since President Joe Biden took office, talk around federal cannabis legalization has certainly picked up. As opposed to how it was over recent years. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has been teasing a quote-unquote forthcoming cannabis legalization bill for like months now, and has been making headlines every time he just like stops somewhere new to just say that it's coming soon. Mm-hmm. They're always running the headline. They love eating that up. Meanwhile, President Biden's known stance on cannabis is one of supporting federal decriminalization rather than full-on legalization. And, amid all this, states are just going ahead and legalizing it for themselves, not waiting for the federal government. We've had a wave of new states during this past election implement their own cannabis legalization for themselves. So for you, how do you think politics, can sort of serve as a chokehold to the growth of the cannabis industry? And what do you think are some fixes for that?
Well, it's an interesting question. Federal legalization, it's my perspective that it's still going to take some time. Biden's a centrist, like through and through. He's not, squarely on the progressive side. And frankly, that's probably how he won. He captured a large audience. And I think he's calculated. I don't think it serves him to come out and be pro cannabis or saying that, he's going to champion any legislation or bills. Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party have largely had a lot of momentum on the progressive side, right? They've seen a lot more progressive candidates. And him and I think Nancy Pelosi have been championing cannabis legislation for the past 6 years, right? So I think it's very much so a drum they're still beating. I think it'll eventually happen, but what will likely fall first is the Safe Banking Act or some form of that. And I think that's going to help us in a lot of different ways. It's the banking aspect's very challenging. We have a bank account, but the audits you have to go through, the regulatory compliance that the bank requires, not just for us to take on, like we're hiring companies, to audit ourselves that we have to pay for, that the banks require. But then the banks have their own internal compliance that they pay for, but they pass that liability on to their customers. Above and beyond that, we have a lot of cash in the industry, right? Cash still floats around, and cash deposit fees are super expensive. They're very expensive. And all of the banking fees, they're another reason why it's hard to be profitable in the cannabis space. They're a huge barrier to entry. And there's really no liquidity in the cannabis industry. Like if I was, if I was making cookies or any other, consumer packaged good, right, apparel, I would go to a bank, I'd get a small business loan. There's all sorts of ways to access capital to propel one's business, both operationally and asset-backed loans, like buying a piece of property. Cannabis company can't go to a bank and say, hey, I want an asset-backed loan. I want a mortgage for this property that I'm either going to cultivate, manufacture, distribute on. Like those don't exist. And the ones that are providing those, they're private money, they're double-digit interest rates, and it makes it a very challenging environment to operate in. It's very expensive, and so that's why it's one of the reasons the black market still exists. You have to have a lot of money to play in the legal market, and it's not set up for profits. It's set up to lose money, which means you're going to raise equity capital to exist, or you're going to take some kind of bridge capital as high interest debt to essentially restructure and raise equity capital to pay off that bridge debt, that bridge loan in the future. So, that's a long-winded way of saying Safe Banking Act will go a long way to offer banking services to more cannabis entrepreneurs and businesses that, that aren't publicly traded companies that have access to, hedge fund money on the CSE or anything like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'll also say this: I know it's the perspective of many businesses that legalization is probably the biggest threat to successful small cannabis companies, legal ones as well, right? Because when legalization happens, the ones that are going to come in, I mean, it's all the ones everybody I think is concerned of and knows about, right? You've got all the big tobacco and alcohol companies that are waiting on the sideline, right? And they have an extraordinary amount of capital. We've already seen them dip their toes in with Constellation, a $5 billion investment, and Molson Coors, and there's a $1.8 billion investment. I think it was from was the tobacco company that went into Kronos. So they're on the sidelines, and more are going to come in because the reality is this is affecting their bottom line. And are they going to buy all of these small companies? Probably not. They're going to buy maybe the big MSOs, right? And then they're going to pour money into them. And what that's going to do is going to marginalize all of the smaller companies and effectively put them out of business because you have to pay to play. You have to pay to be on the retail shelves. You have to, pump money into the marketing and sales platforms and distribution platforms to be on the shelves and be relevant. It is my belief and I'll say even hope that the process takes a little longer, really for more companies to grow, to be able to compete. It'd be great to see Safe Banking Act. You mentioned, I think that alternative forms of liquidity through, blockchain and cryptocurrency can provide some of those things to cannabis.
Sure.
But yeah, it is my. We'll see what happens. I really think we're 4 years out, but at least. But who knows?
Okay.
Who knows?
And so speaking, I want to sort of tie this in because we sort of mentioned this before we started recording here. So going from the wide scope of federal cannabis legalization to more like local politics or local concerns. I understand that you are up in Sonoma County, up in Northern California, and you mentioned before we started recording here that you see sort of a shift happening up there. So tell me more about this this sort of new Emerald Triangle vibe that you see happening up there.
Yeah, it has been interesting. When we look at, the biggest challenge is to everybody's growth and certainly profitability is a stabilized supply chain. And in California, and really more so on the West Coast, because we have really a legacy of cannabis production and whole economies that revolve around the cannabis production. And the typical Emerald Triangle has historically been Trinity County, Humboldt County, and Mendocino County. And Trinity County has essentially become obsolete because it's wooded and it's not, it's driven by timber. There's not any agricultural, areas to scale, really. Most folks came out to the Emerald Triangle to hide, to grow cannabis away from everyone. And as obviously legalization has taken hold, where cannabis is going to be grown is in agricultural regions, right? Valleys, places with resources. It is not sustainable to cultivate cannabis in the woods. Maybe at a very small scale, you can do that. But for what the California supply chain needs, and obviously thinking about this as a national and international supply chain, it's being done and going to continue to scale on agricultural valley floor with access to water and power and labor and all the things that are needed to scale agriculture. And so what that means, Humboldt is frankly foggy with not a lot of ag land. Trinity has no ag land. Mendocino has some. The valley floors, specifically like the Ukiah and Hopland Valley, where there's a lot of wine and vineyards. And then up there's some valley in Willits and also in Laytonville, right along the 101 stretch there. And then you have to the east of Mendocino County's Lake County. And they do have a lot of ag land, but what has really driven them to become a supply region is their regulatory environment. The Board of Supervisors has just they've been frankly, I wouldn't say they're progressive as we think of the term progressive, but they've been very progressive towards cannabis policy. I think largely due to revenue generation for the county. And then you've got the county south of Mendocino, which is Sonoma County. And they just voted in 10% of parcel size for cannabis cultivation, which is frankly massive. And Lake County's 5%, but we're starting to see 20, 40, 100-acre farms, cannabis farms pop up. And then you have Mendocino County, which just expanded cultivation as well. So we're seeing a whole new supply chain pop up with what I would consider a new Emerald Triangle and supply driven economies around Lake County, Mendocino County, and Sonoma County. And it's driven primarily by regulatory changes and secondarily from access to resources, water, and people. And it's been meaty. There's a way to do this it's so meaty, actually. Every county's doing a little different.
Right.
Tax rates are different. People's and leadership's incentives for bringing in cannabis regulation are very different. And frankly, there's a lot of community pushback as well. There's a lot of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So it has been very dynamic. Yeah.
To say the least. Yeah. Okay. All right. I can see, just the very nature of different localities having such varying, like you said, regulations and policies. I can imagine that in and of itself causing a lot of dynamicness, as you say.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just the communities in
interesting.
Each county are very different, right? Lake County is like kind of very it's very conservative and very rooted in the agriculture community, pears, vines, and ranching, a lot of ranching. And they're very financially driven. In fact, so much so that they're trying to preserve the valley floor. You're not allowed to row crop cannabis, which is where most of the water and good ag land is. What they opened up these 20 and 100-acre farms to is the hillside, and they've totally allowed people and farmers and property owners to clear cut those sides of property and spring up these large cannabis farms. So it's largely economically driven to produce revenue for the county. It's a very poor county, very, very poor county. And it's increased property values just extraordinarily. Properties that were worth $200,000 are selling for $5 million. And then you've got Mendocino County, which does have a deep historical cannabis economy, and that is rooted in the small farmer. And they're scared of legalization, and it's tough for them to have perspective of what's happening, in Santa Barbara County and Santa Cruz, and let alone what's happening in other states.
Right.
And then we've got Sonoma County, which is largely driven by wealthy landowners, right? Vineyard owners, grape owners. I mean, what 30 acres of land goes for in Sonoma County would buy you 300 acres of land in Mendocino County. And so the ones that
Wow.
really stand to benefit are, older families, right? Legacy families that want to get in. They're grape growers that
Mhm.
want to get into the cannabis industry. So there's very, very different dynamics. But these three counties are absolutely going to produce um, a lot. I don't know about the majority. Santa Barbara is a monster as well, but a ton of cannabis for California and
Oh
truly in
yeah.
interstate commerce as federal legalization comes.
I see. I see. And speaking of which, federal cannabis legalization is, of course, a hot
Yeah.
button topic in this country right now. Um, Another hot button topic that cannabis happens to be involved in is this increase in retail investing and meme stocks over the course of the past year, both of which have certainly gained a lot of attention, like I said, over the past year, especially with everyone
Yeah.
inside and quarantined during the pandemic. And recently, again, just this past May, meme stocks really jumped back into the spotlight for retail investors as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were crashing. Um, Cannabis stocks, according to Vanda Research, may be the next area of attention
Yeah.
for retail investors. And we've already sort of seen some of that happening with stocks from companies such as Sundial and Tilray. So tell me what your thoughts are on the role of cannabis stocks or cannabis meme stocks in this retail
Sure.
investing
I'm
trend.
probably not as steeped in meme stocks per se. Uh, in
Sure.
terms of just the public markets, um, it's been an interesting ride, right? It's the public markets in general, just an easier way, especially initially as an organization, to get liquidity, right? I mean, the cannabis industry in general is so
Hmm.
hard to raise capital for, especially in a industry that's not set up for profit. Now, there are a few states that are doing pretty well. Uh, I know like GTI and True Leave, folks that have like built their moat is essentially limited license states, right? If you can do well in Florida where nobody else, there's only, a finite amount of licenses, and there's quite a few states like this where there's a finite amount of licenses, and effectively you can charge whatever you want for an eighth, and they are. You go to Illinois and it's $120 for an eighth of cannabis. Of course they're profitable, right? But they don't have the competition that we have in
Right.
California and Oregon. Um,
Sure.
Now, I think that moat's going to fall, as federal legalization comes, and they're obviously going to fight to protect interstate commerce. I should say against interstate commerce, but I think it's inevitable.
Hmm.
What I think is interesting is, publicly traded companies. I think what you should keep an eye out right now, you have publicly traded companies that um, have this moat around limited license states, and frankly, they're the only ones that are profitable. And then you've got publicly traded companies in um, a lot a lot less. There's far fewer publicly traded companies that are focused on the West Coast, and I think those are the ones that are interesting to keep an eye out because they are operating in the hardest places to do business, and the ones that find profitability there when that wall falls and interstate commerce happens, I think they're going to have a lot. I think they're going to steamroll some of these limited license companies that are
Mm.
investing extraordinary amounts of money for short-term profit, for short-term gains, short-term gains. Um, but the
Mhm.
ones really focused on the supply chain and vertical integration and running a solid business in the toughest areas to be profitable on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, even Colorado. Um, when the curtain falls, the walls drop. It's going to be very easy for them to push east, and they have a much more solid business model. So, in terms of
Mm.
publicly traded markets, we're a private company. Henry's is. There's an appeal to the public markets. You just have to be. Um, uh, you have to be you it's easy to get money at the beginning. It can be harder and more challenging if you don't meet your performance metrics. Publicly traded companies in general are driven on short-term growth. It's tough to run a publicly traded company and have your fiduciary responsibility to shareholders that are looking what's happening every quarter, and run a business looking out what's going to happen in 2 or 3 or 5 years. It's a tough predicament to be in, which is why so many eviscerate money for these short term, shiny lights, so to speak. Yeah.
Certainly. Well, all that being said, my final question for you before I let you go, and get back to your kids is, what have you got going on? They're like,
the whole
Dad,
time, man, the whole time.
hello,
They're trying to pull me out of this.
all right, wrap it up. No, it's all good. No, it is all good. No worries at all. Just tell our viewers and our listeners what you've got looking forward to the most over at Henry's Original.
Oh man,
and up
we're
in
building our
Sonoma County.
supply
What have
chain.
you got in the works?
What's been so exciting to us is to be involved in all of the local politics, to look at Mendocino County as like a high-end cannabis destination. I look at what Napa built with wine and the opportunity they had. And Mendocino had that same opportunity with wine, but Napa seized it. They built the trade organizations. They marketed the region around Cabernet. And we have that same opportunity with cannabis. We have something that money can't buy, and that's a legacy of cannabis cultivation, a culture that has been built here. And I've really focused on setting our roots here. I've built my whole cannabis career here in Mendocino County, and raised my family in Mendocino County, and have a lot of appreciation for really what it is and the folks that came before us, and that's the torch that has been handed to us, and what we have to to market and proliferate out into the cannabis industry throughout California and beyond. I'd like to see Mendocino cannabis in every state and in every country, and look at it really no different than, like, let's say Cuban cigars or Tennessee whiskey or Kentucky bourbon, right? That's what's exciting, and that's what we're focused on. We're doing all sorts of new product releases as well, and getting into concentrates. We've always been flower first. Really building Mendocino's legacy has been on the forefront of our minds.
Right on. I dig that. Well, best of luck. Please keep up all of the good work. Tell the kids I said hey.
Thanks, RJ.
And Jamie Warm, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate your time. Please, again, continue to be well and stay safe. And hey, if I'm ever up north, I will certainly be looking you up.
Thanks for having me. Please do.
Dig it. Oh, I will take you up on that for sure. Absolutely. No problem. Jamie Warm, everybody. That is it for Hash It Out, y'all. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I am your host, as always, RJ Balde, and I will catch y'all next time. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our Trichomes community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.